The morning fog hung thick over London's Heathrow Airport as Flight Lieutenant Marcus Thompson approached the British Airways check-in counter. His crisp Royal Guard uniform drew respectful nods from passers-by, but it was the glinting Victoria Cross pinned to his chest that made people pause and stare. The highest military decoration for valor in the British Armed Forces, earned during humanity's first contact war against the Zephyrian Empire 3 years ago, Marcus had been on leave, visiting his sister in Edinburgh, when the emergency recall came through. All Victoria Cross recipients were to report immediately to the Galactic Defense Council headquarters in Geneva. Something big was happening, and Earth needed her heroes. The young woman behind the counter barely looked up from her screen as Marcus placed his military travel orders on the marble surface. Her name tag read Jennifer, and she wore the practiced smile of someone who dealt with hundreds of passengers daily. "Next flight to Geneva," Marcus said politely, sliding his identification across the counter. Jennifer's eyes flicked to his uniform, then to the medal, but her expression remained unchanged. She tapped her keyboard with exaggerated slowness, her pink nails clicking against the keys like tiny hammers. "I'm sorry, but that flight is completely booked," she said without looking up. "Next available seat would be tomorrow afternoon at 2:15. Marcus frowned. His orders were crystal clear. Immediate departure, highest priority. "Ma'am, these are military orders. There should be a seat reserved under emergency protocols." Jennifer finally looked at him properly, taking in the Victoria Cross with what seemed like deliberate indifference. "Yes, well, military reservations need to be made 48 hours in advance. Company policy." She turned back to her screen. "Would you like me to book you on tomorrow's flight?" "You don't understand," Marcus said, keeping his voice level despite the growing frustration. "This is a matter of galactic security. I have emergency travel authorization." A man in an expensive suit behind Marcus shifted impatiently. "Some of us have real business to attend to," he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Jennifer smiled at the businessman over Marcus's shoulder. "I'll be right with you, sir." Then to Marcus, "Look, soldier boy, I don't care what shiny metal you're wearing. Rules are rules. No reservation, no seat. Simple as that." The dismissive tone sent a chill through the nearby passengers. A few had recognized the Victoria Cross and were watching the exchange with growing disbelief. An elderly man in a wheelchair leaned forward, squinting at Marcus's chest. "Good Lord," the old man whispered to his companion. "That's a VC. The lad earned that fighting the Zephyrians." Marcus pulled out his emergency contact information. "Perhaps you could speak with your supervisor? This concerns Earth's defense." Jennifer rolled her eyes theatrically. "My supervisor is in a meeting." "Look, plenty of people think they're important. You want special treatment? Call your commanding officer or something." The businessman behind Marcus stepped forward aggressively. "Excuse me, miss, but I have a platinum membership and a first-class ticket. Could we move this along?" "Of course, sir," Jennifer beamed, completely ignoring Marcus. "Let me take care of you right away." Marcus stepped aside, checking his watch. The Galactic Defense Council had been explicit about timing. Every minute counted when dealing with potential alien threats. He pulled out his secure communicator, debating whether to contact his commanding officer or try another airline. What he didn't know was that 3 terminals away, King Charles III had just arrived for his own flight to the International Space Station, where he was scheduled to inaugurate humanity's first orbital embassy. The King's security detail was already coordinating with airport officials, and the Royal Communications Officer was monitoring all emergency military channels. As Marcus stood there, watching Jennifer fawn over the businessman who was complaining about the entitled military types taking up everyone's time, he couldn't help but think about the last time he'd been dismissed because of his service. It was different then. He'd been fresh from the Zephyrian conflict, traumatized and struggling. Now he was a decorated officer with vital responsibilities. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd fought aliens bent on enslaving humanity, survived plasma bombardments and zero-gravity combat, earned the highest honor his country could bestow, and here he was, defeated by airline bureaucracy and one indifferent employee who seemed to take pleasure in making his life difficult. Behind him, more passengers were gathering, some recognizing his mettle and murmuring among themselves. The elderly man in the wheelchair had pulled out his phone and was quietly making a call. Marcus didn't notice. He was too focused on trying to figure out how to get to Geneva. Before it was too late, what? Marcus also didn't know was that Jennifer's dismissive treatment of a Victoria Cross recipient was about to become the biggest mistake of her career. Because in 8 minutes, her ordinary Tuesday morning was going to become anything but ordinary. The wheels of royal protocol were already beginning to turn, though nobody at Gate 47 realized it yet. Sometimes the most important moments in history start with the smallest acts of disrespect, and sometimes those acts reach the ears of people who have the power to make things very, very interesting for everyone involved. Marcus checked his watch again. 7 minutes had passed since Jennifer had first dismissed him. He had no idea that in 60 seconds his day was about to change dramatically. Marcus was still standing at the counter when his secure communicator buzzed with an incoming message. The display showed a priority alpha transmission, the highest level of military communication. He stepped away from the crowd to answer it privately. "Flight Lieutenant Thompson," he said quietly into the device. "Marcus, this is General Harrison. I've just received word that you're having difficulties with civilian transport." The general's voice was crisp, professional, but Marcus detected an undertone of something else. Anticipation, perhaps. "Yes, sir. British Airways is refusing to honor emergency military protocols. I'm trying to find alternative transport now." "Negative, Flight Lieutenant. Maintain your position at the British Airways counter. Do not attempt alternative arrangements. That is a direct order." Marcus blinked in confusion. "Sir, with respect, every minute counts. If I can't get to Geneva, you'll get to Geneva, Marcus. Trust me on this. Just stay exactly where you are and wait for further instructions. And Marcus?" "Yes, sir?" "You might want to keep your communicator handy. I have a feeling you'll be receiving some interesting calls in the next few minutes." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his device in bewilderment. He looked back toward the counter where Jennifer was still helping the businessman, taking her time with his upgrade, requests, and laughing at his jokes about military freeloaders. What Marcus didn't know was that the elderly man in the wheelchair, a retired Royal Marines colonel named Sir Robert Henley, had just finished a very interesting phone call of his own. Sir Robert had served as King Charles's military advisor during the Zephyrian War and maintained direct access to the royal household. 3 terminals away, King Charles was reviewing his schedule when his private secretary approached with urgent news. "Your Majesty, we've just received a rather disturbing report from Terminal 5. Apparently, a Victoria Cross recipient is being denied emergency military transport by British Airways staff." The king looked up sharply from his briefing papers. As a former military officer himself, he held the Victoria Cross in the highest esteem. During the Zephyrian conflict, he had personally met with every recipient, understanding the incredible sacrifice and heroism their medals represented. "Tell me more," the king said, his voice carrying that particular tone that royal staff had learned to take very seriously. "Flight Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, Your Majesty. He's the young man who single-handedly held off 3 Zephyrian assault craft during the Battle of Europa Station, saved over 2,000 civilian lives." The king remembered the incident well. Thompson had been badly wounded in that action, and his Victoria Cross ceremony had been conducted while he was still recovering in hospital. Charles had spent an hour talking with the young officer about his service and his plans for the future. "And British Airways is refusing him passage?" "According to our source, yes. The staff member appears to be treating him with considerable disrespect, despite his emergency military orders." King Charles set down his papers and stood up. "Get me the CEO of British Airways on the phone, now." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Shall I also get me a direct line to that terminal? I want to speak with Flight Lieutenant Thompson personally." Meanwhile, back at Terminal 5, Jennifer had finished with the businessmen and was now dealing with a family trying to change their vacation booking. Marcus waited patiently, occasionally checking his watch and wondering what General Harrison had meant about interesting phone calls. The answer came sooner than expected. The gate phone rang, and Jennifer answered it with her standard greeting. "British Airways, Gate 47. This is Jennifer speaking." Marcus couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he watched Jennifer's expression change from casual indifference to confusion, then to something approaching panic. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Did you say King Charles?" Several passengers nearby turned at the mention of the royal name. The businessman who had been complaining about Marcus looked up from his phone with sudden interest. "Yes, I understand, but are you certain this is—" Jennifer's face had gone pale. "One moment, please, Your Majesty." She held the phone against her chest and looked around wildly until her eyes landed on Marcus. For the first time since he'd approached her counter, she seemed to actually see him. Really see the uniform. The medal, the man who had earned both. Excuse me?" she called out, her voice now small and uncertain. "Flight Lieutenant Thompson?" Marcus approached the counter, noting how different Jennifer's demeanor had become. Gone was the dismissive arrogance, replaced by something that looked very much like fear. There's someone on the phone who wants to speak with you," she said, holding out the receiver with a trembling hand. Marcus took the phone, still confused about what was happening. "Flight Lieutenant Thompson speaking. Marcus, this is King Charles. I understand you're having some difficulties with your travel arrangements." Even Marcus, trained in military protocol and accustomed to high-pressure situations, felt his breath catch. "Your Majesty, Yes, sir. There seems to be some confusion about emergency military protocols." "Oh, I don't think there's any confusion at all, Flight Lieutenant. I think the situation is quite clear. You're a decorated war hero trying to serve your country, and you're being treated poorly by people who should know better." Marcus glanced at Jennifer, who was now staring at him with wide eyes. Around the gate area, passengers had stopped what they were doing, sensing that something significant was happening. "Your Majesty, I appreciate your concern, but I don't want to cause any trouble." King Charles chuckled, a sound that somehow managed to be both warm and slightly ominous. "Oh, Marcus, I'm afraid the trouble has already been caused. But don't worry, it's not going to be your trouble to deal with." While Marcus was still on the phone with King Charles, Jennifer watched in growing horror as her supervisor, Mr. Davies, came rushing toward the gate with two other officials she didn't recognize. His face was flushed red, and he looked like a man who had just received the worst news of his professional life. "Jennifer," he called out, slightly out of breath. "Please tell me you haven't been refusing service to a Victoria Cross recipient." Jennifer's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Around her, passengers were now openly staring, many of them holding up phones to record what was clearly becoming a very public situation. Marcus finished his conversation with the king and handed the phone back to Jennifer, who took it as if it might explode in her hands. "Your Majesty wishes to speak with your supervisor," Marcus said simply. Mr. Davies practically lunged for the phone. "Your Majesty, this is David Davies, terminal manager. I want to assure you that we will resolve this situation immediately." Whatever the king said next made Davies go even paler than Jennifer. Marcus could hear the royal voice through the phone, calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Yes, Your Majesty, absolutely. Right away, Your Majesty." "No, there will be no charges for anything. Yes, I understand completely." Davies hung up and turned to face his staff and the growing crowd of onlookers. His hands were visibly shaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I want to apologize profusely for the treatment Flight Lieutenant Thompson has received today. This is absolutely not how British Airways treats our military heroes." Jennifer tried to shrink behind her computer screen, but there was nowhere to hide. The businessman who had been so dismissive earlier was now taking pictures, probably to post on social media about witnessing a royal intervention. Marcus's secure communicator buzzed again. This time it was a different voice, crisp, efficient, unmistakably royal household staff. "Flight Lieutenant Thompson, this is Commander Williams' Royal Household. His Majesty has instructed me to inform you that alternative arrangements have been made for your travel to Geneva. Sir, look to your left, toward the main terminal entrance." Marcus turned and saw something that made several passengers gasp. A convoy of black vehicles with royal escort motorcycles was pulling up to the terminal. Leading them was the distinctive Bentley State Limousine, its royal standard flying proudly. "His Majesty is personally ensuring your transport to Geneva," Commander Williams continued. "You'll be flying on the royal flight departing in 30 minutes. The crowd around Gate 47 had grown considerably as word spread through the terminal. Security guards were trying to maintain order, but everyone wanted to see what was happening. Marcus could hear whispered conversations in multiple languages as international passengers tried to understand why a British military officer was suddenly being treated like royalty. Davies was now frantically making phone calls, probably to his superiors, explaining how one of his employees had just insulted a war hero in front of King Charles. Meanwhile, Jennifer stood frozen at her station, finally understanding the magnitude of her mistake. An elderly woman approached Marcus, her eyes bright with tears. "Young man, I just wanted to thank you for your service. My grandson serves in the Navy, and what you did during the war. Well, we all remember." More people began coming forward. A veteran in a wheelchair who saluted Marcus despite being in civilian clothes. A young mother who wanted her children to meet a real hero. Business travelers who put aside their hurry to shake his hand. Marcus found himself overwhelmed by the sudden attention. He had always been uncomfortable with public recognition, preferring to think of his service as simply doing his duty. But the warmth and respect from these strangers was deeply moving. Through the large windows, he could see the royal convoy arranging itself with military precision. Royal protection officers were coordinating with airport security, and ground crew were preparing for what was clearly going to be a very special departure. "Flight Lieutenant Thompson?" A new voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see a woman in an expensive business suit approaching with what looked like a legal document in her hands. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, Regional Director for British Airways. On behalf of the entire company, I want to offer our sincerest apologies for today's incident." She gestured toward Jennifer, who was now sitting in a chair looking like she wanted to disappear entirely. "The employee in question will be facing serious disciplinary action. We're also implementing immediate retraining for all staff regarding military protocols and respect for our armed forces." Marcus nodded politely, but his attention was drawn to the activity outside. Royal Marines were now visible among the convoy, their red uniforms a striking contrast to the gray terminal building. His communicator buzzed once more. "Flight Lieutenant, this is General Harrison again. I trust your transportation situation has improved." "Yes, sir. Considerably." "Good. I should mention that your arrival in Geneva is now going to be somewhat different than originally planned. When a Victoria Cross recipient travels on the royal flight, certain protocols kick in automatically." "What kind of protocols, sir?" "The kind that ensure every delegate at the Galactic Defense Council knows exactly who they're dealing with. Marcus, you're not just representing Britain anymore. You're representing humanity itself. And thanks to today's events, you'll be arriving with the full weight of the crown behind you." Marcus looked around at the crowd that had gathered, at the royal convoy outside, at Jennifer, who was now crying quietly behind her counter. 8 minutes ago, he had been just another passenger trying to catch a flight. Now he was at the center of an international incident that was rapidly becoming a demonstration of how humans treated their heroes. What he didn't yet realize was that news of the incident was already spreading far beyond Heathrow Airport, and that his arrival in Geneva was going to send a very clear message to the other species in the Galactic Defense Council about human values and the respect Britain showed to those who served with honor. The Royal Marines who entered Terminal 5 moved with the practiced precision that had made them famous across the galaxy. They weren't there for ceremony, they were there for Marcus. As they approached Gate 47, passengers instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path from the check-in counter to the terminal exit. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, commanding the Royal Marine Detachment, saluted Marcus crisply. "Flight Lieutenant Thompson, sir. His Majesty has requested that we escort you to the royal flight, if you're ready, sir." Marcus returned the salute, still somewhat stunned by the turn of events. As he shouldered his travel bag, he caught sight of Jennifer one last time. She was no longer crying, but her face showed the full weight of understanding what she had done. She had dismissed a war hero, insulted someone who had risked everything for humanity, and done it all while the King of England was just 3 terminals away. Mr. Davies approached Marcus one final time. "Flight Lieutenant, I know this doesn't make up for what happened, but British Airways would like to offer you and your family lifetime platinum status, and we're making a substantial donation to the Victoria Cross Heroes Foundation in your name." Marcus nodded graciously, but his mind was already moving ahead to Geneva, and whatever crisis awaited him there. As the Royal Marines formed up around him, he began walking toward the exit, the crowd of passengers parting before them like water. The scene outside the terminal was unlike anything Heathrow had ever witnessed. The royal convoy stretched for nearly 100 meters, with motorcycle outriders at both ends and the unmistakable outline of the king's personal Bentley at the center. Royal protection officers coordinated with airport security, while ground crew prepared the tarmac for departure. but it was the aircraft waiting on the runway that truly caught Marcus's attention. The Royal Air Force Voyager, gleaming white with the Union Jack prominently displayed, sat ready for immediate departure. Ground crew members were loading what appeared to be additional passengers. Marcus could see several figures in military uniforms boarding the aircraft. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison noticed his observation. "His Majesty thought you might appreciate some company on the flight to Geneva, sir. The other Victoria Cross recipients from the Zephyrian War are already aboard." Marcus felt a surge of emotion. The Brotherhood of Victoria Cross recipients was small and exclusive. Only 12 had been awarded during humanity's first interstellar conflict. The idea that they were all being brought together spoke to the importance of whatever was happening in Geneva. As they approached the Bentley, the rear door opened and Marcus found himself face to face with King Charles himself. The king stepped out of the vehicle, causing a flurry of activity among the security detail, and a wave of excitement from the terminal windows where hundreds of people were now watching. "Marcus," the king said warmly, extending his hand. "I'm sorry we had to meet again under these circumstances, but I'm pleased we could resolve your travel difficulties." "Your Majesty, I don't know how to thank you." This was far more than necessary. King Charles smiled, but there was something serious in his expression. "Marcus, what happened in that terminal wasn't just about airline customer service. It was about how we treat the people who've sacrificed for our freedom. That young woman's attitude toward you reflects something larger. A disconnect between civilian society and the military that we cannot afford." The king paused, looking toward the aircraft where the other Victoria Cross recipients were waiting. The Galactic Defense Council called this emergency session because intelligence suggests the Zephyrians are planning another offensive. They want to test humanity's resolve, to see if we've grown soft in the 3 years since the last war. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the London weather. "And what's our response going to be, Your Majesty?" "That's why you're all being brought together. The other species in the council need to see that Britain, that humanity, still honors its warriors. When you walk into that conference room with the full authority of the crown behind you, every alien delegate will understand that we haven't forgotten what strength looks like." The king gestured toward the aircraft. "Your fellow recipients are briefing each other on the intelligence reports. What you'll find is that the Zephyrians have been testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses. They've been watching our civilian populations, looking for signs that we've lost our fighting spirit." "Have we, sir?" King Charles glanced back toward the terminal, where Jennifer was probably still sitting at her station contemplating her career choices. "What do you think, Marcus, based on what happened in there?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think most people have simply forgotten what the cost of freedom really is, Your Majesty. They've grown comfortable with peace." "Exactly. And that's why today's incident, while unfortunate, may actually serve a purpose. By tomorrow morning, the story of how Britain treats its war heroes will be front-page news across the galaxy. The aliens will see that we don't just honor our warriors in ceremony, we honor them in action." A royal protection officer approached discreetly. "Your Majesty, the aircraft is ready for departure." King Charles nodded and turned back to Marcus. "When you reach Geneva, you'll find that the dynamics have already shifted. News of the royal intervention has preceded you. The Zephyrian ambassador specifically asked why the human military delegation was arriving under royal escort. What did our people tell him? The truth. That when Britain's heroes call, the crown answers. That when our warriors need support, they receive it immediately and without question. That any species considering aggression against humanity should remember who they're dealing with." As they walked toward the aircraft, Marcus realized that the simple act of being denied an airline seat had triggered something much larger. The king was right. This was about more than customer service. It was about the kind of society humanity had become, and the kind of message they sent to potential enemies. The Royal Marines accompanied them to the aircraft steps, where Marcus could see his fellow Victoria Cross recipients waiting in the doorway. Each of them had their own story of heroism from the Zephyrian War, their own moment when they had stood between humanity and destruction. "Marcus," the king said as they reached the aircraft, "what happened today reminded me why we fight these wars in the first place. Not for governments or policies, but for the right of ordinary people to live their lives in peace, even if they sometimes forget to appreciate those who ensure that peace." As Marcus climbed the steps to the royal flight, he understood that he was no longer just traveling to a military briefing. He was carrying with him the full weight of British tradition, royal authority, and the unbreakable bond between a nation and its warriors. The interior of the Royal Air Force Voyager was configured like a flying conference room, with secure communication systems and classified briefing materials already laid out on polished tables. As Marcus entered, 11 pairs of eyes turned toward him, his fellow Victoria Cross recipients from the Zephyrian War, each representing a different branch of the military and a different moment of extraordinary heroism. Squadron leader Sarah Chen stood first, her pilot's wings catching the cabin light. She had earned her Victoria Cross by ramming her damaged fighter into a Zephyrian capital ship, saving an entire colony world. The fact that she had somehow survived the impact and been rescued 3 days later only added to the legend. "Marcus," she called out warmly, "we heard about your airline adventure. Leave it to you to turn a ticket problem into a royal escort." Flight Sergeant David MacLeod, the gruff Scottish engineer who had single-handedly prevented 3 Zephyrian boarding parties from taking the HMS Defiant, grinned broadly. "Aye, and here I thought the most excitement we'd have today was classified briefings and alien politics." As the aircraft prepared for takeoff, Marcus took his seat among the most decorated soldiers in human history. Each person in this cabin had faced impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway. Together they represented something the Zephyrians had never quite understood about humanity: the willingness to sacrifice everything for others. Commander Elizabeth Harris, the Royal Navy officer who had held the orbital defense platform at New Gibraltar for 18 hours against overwhelming odds, activated the secure briefing system. "Now that we're all here, let's review what we're walking into." The main display showed a holographic map of known galaxy, with human territories marked in blue and Zephyrian space in red. What immediately caught everyone's attention were the numerous yellow markers scattered along the border between the two powers. Intelligence reports indicate at least 47 separate incidents over the past 6 months. Commander Harris continued. "Zephyrian scout ships probing our defenses, testing response times, mapping our patrol routes. They're preparing for something big." Major Robert Sterling, whose Victoria Cross came from leading the defense of the Titan mining colonies, leaned forward intently. "What's the Galactic Defense Council's official position?" "That's where it gets interesting," Harris replied. "The Centaurian ambassador has proposed immediate peace negotiations. The Andromedan delegate suggests a defensive alliance, but the Zephyrian representative has been making some very specific demands." She changed the display to show diplomatic correspondence. "They want humanity to reduce our military presence in 3 key sectors, claiming our patrols are provocative. They want access to our advanced shield technology, saying it's destabilizing the balance of power. And they want the Victoria Cross recipients specifically excluded from any military command positions." The cabin fell silent. Captain James Murphy, whose medal came from evacuating civilians under fire during the siege of Europa, spoke first. "They want us removed from command? Why?" "Because they remember what we accomplished during the war," Marcus said quietly. "We didn't just fight them. We beat them in ways they didn't think possible. Every strategic victory humanity achieved had at least one Victoria Cross recipient involved." Squadron leader Chen nodded grimly. "They're not just afraid of our technology or our numbers. They're afraid of what humans do when we're pushed to our limits." The aircraft's communication system chimed, indicating an incoming priority message. Commander Harris activated the secure channel, and suddenly they were looking at General Harrison from the Galactic Defense Council headquarters in Geneva. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad you're all together. I need to brief you on some developments that have occurred since your departure from London." The general's expression was serious, but showed a hint of satisfaction. "News of the airline incident and the royal intervention has spread faster than we anticipated. Within 2 hours, every major news network in human space was running the story. The headline most of them are using is 'When Heroes Call, Kings Answer.'" He paused to let that sink in. "But more importantly, the story has reached the other species in the Galactic Defense Council. The Zephyrian ambassador specifically requested an emergency session to discuss what he called inappropriate royal interference in military affairs." Major Sterling laughed harshly. "He's complaining that our king honored a war hero? He's complaining that the incident demonstrates what he calls dangerous human militarism. His exact words were that any society which treats warriors as royalty is inherently aggressive and cannot be trusted with galactic security. The Victoria Cross recipients exchanged glances. Each of them understood the deeper implications of what the general was saying. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "are they trying to use this incident to justify aggressive action?" "That's exactly what they're doing, Marcus. They're arguing that humanity's worship of military violence, their words, makes us a threat to galactic peace. They want the Council to authorize preemptive action to contain the human threat." Commander Harris leaned back in her chair. "And what's the Council's response?" General Harrison smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "That's where your royal escort becomes strategically important. When you arrive in Geneva, you won't just be representing the British military. You'll be arriving as official representatives of the Crown, with full diplomatic immunity and the authority to speak for the British government." He changed the display to show the Geneva Conference Center. The other species have been watching this story unfold, and they're asking themselves a crucial question. What kind of society produces soldiers like you, and then honors them the way Britain honored Marcus today? And what conclusion are they reaching? Asked Flight Sergeant McLeod. That humanity is exactly the kind of ally they want and exactly the kind of enemy they want to avoid. The Centaurians have already indicated their withdrawing support for the Zephyrian position. The Andromedans are talking about expanded military cooperation with human forces. As the aircraft began its descent toward Geneva, Marcus realized that Jennifer's dismissive attitude at Heathrow had accidentally triggered something remarkable. By disrespecting a war hero, she had inadvertently created an opportunity for Britain to demonstrate its values to the galaxy. "General," Marcus said, "what exactly do you need us to do when we arrive?" "Simple, Marcus. Walk into that conference room wearing your medals, carrying the authority of the Crown, and remind everyone present what happens when someone threatens humanity. The Zephyrians want to test our resolve. Let's show them exactly what human resolve looks like." The Geneva Galactic Defense Council headquarters towered over Lake Geneva like a monument to interstellar cooperation. Its crystalline structure designed to accommodate delegates from dozens of different worlds. As the Royal Air Force Voyager touched down at the private airfield, Marcus could see the impressive array of alien spacecraft parked nearby, sleek Centaurian vessels, geometric Andromedan transports, and the distinctly aggressive-looking Zephyrian warships. The 12 Victoria Cross recipients disembarked in formation, their dress uniforms immaculate and their medals gleaming in the Swiss sunlight. What awaited them was unlike any military arrival Marcus had ever experienced. A full honor guard of Swiss guards in their traditional uniforms flanked the red carpet, while diplomatic officials from multiple worlds watched from elevated viewing areas. Ambassador Catherine Morrison, Britain's senior representative to the Galactic Council, approached with barely contained excitement. "Flight Lieutenant Thompson, I cannot tell you how perfectly timed your arrival is. The Zephyrian delegation has spent the last 3 hours arguing that humanity's militaristic culture makes us unsuitable partners for galactic security." She gestured toward the imposing council building. "They've been using footage from various human conflicts, citing statistics about military spending, and generally painting us as a species obsessed with warfare. Then 30 minutes ago, the story from Heathrow started playing on every newsfeed in the building. As they walked along the red carpet, Marcus noticed the variety of alien observers. The tall, elegant Centaurians with their silvery skin and multiple arms were recording everything. The crystalline Andromedans seemed to be analyzing the proceedings through their complex optical sensors. And standing apart from the others, the Zephyrians watched with their characteristic mixture of arrogance and barely concealed hostility. "What exactly did they see?" asked Commander Harris. "They saw King Charles personally intervening to ensure a war hero received proper treatment. They saw your entire society mobilizing to honor someone who had served with distinction. Most importantly, they saw the difference between a culture that honors warriors and a culture that worships war." The massive doors of the council chamber opened to reveal the most impressive diplomatic space in the galaxy. Representatives from 47 different worlds sat in carefully arranged sections, each delegation's seating designed to accommodate their species-specific requirements. At the center of the chamber sat the main council table, where the major powers conducted their business. The Zephyrian ambassador, war leader Zektar, rose from his position as the British delegation entered. His species stood nearly 3 meters tall, with armored carapaces and multiple eyes that allowed them to track several targets simultaneously. When he spoke, his voice carried the intimidating harmonics that had once terrified human colonists. "So the humans arrive with their warriors in full display," Zektar announced loudly enough for the entire chamber to hear. "This only proves our point about their inherently aggressive nature. They cannot even attend a peace conference without military pageantry." Ambassador Morrison stepped forward smoothly. "War Leader Zektar, these officers are here as official representatives of His Majesty's government, carrying full diplomatic credentials. Their presence is entirely appropriate under galactic law." The Centaurian Prime Delegate, her forearms moving in the graceful gestures that indicated formal speech, addressed the chamber. "Perhaps the war leader could explain why he finds the presence of decorated veterans disturbing?" The Centaurian Republic sees only honored defenders of their people. Zektar's multiple eyes fixed on Marcus and his Victoria Cross. "Because these are not merely veterans, Prime Delegate. These are the humans who turned the tide of our previous conflict through tactics that bordered on the barbaric. Their very presence here is a threat." An uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber. Marcus realized that this was the moment General Harrison had prepared them for. The Zephyrians were trying to paint humanity's greatest heroes as villains, hoping to isolate Earth diplomatically before launching their new offensive. Squadron Leader Chen stepped forward, her pilot's wings catching the light from the chamber's energy sources. "War Leader Zektar, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're not here to threaten anyone. We're here because our government believes that those who have defended peace should have a voice in preserving it." The Andromedan science captain, speaking through harmonic frequencies that were translated for the other species, added their perspective. "The Andromedan collective finds the human approach fascinating. They honor those who serve not because they celebrate violence, but because they understand the cost of freedom." Zektar moved closer to the British delegation, his imposing form designed to intimidate. "The cost of freedom?" "These humans speak of freedom while wearing medals earned through the destruction of Zephyrian lives." Major Sterling, whose calm demeanor had been legendary during the siege of the Titan colonies, looked up at the towering alien without flinching. "War Leader, those medals were earned defending innocent civilians from your forces. If you're troubled by the consequences of aggression, perhaps you should reconsider launching it." The chamber erupted in conversation as delegates from multiple worlds responded to the exchange. Marcus could see the subtle body language of the various species. The Centaurians appeared pleased. The Andromedans were analyzing everything with increased intensity, and several of the smaller delegations were leaning forward with obvious interest. Zektar's voice rose above the diplomatic chatter. "This is exactly what we warned about. Human arrogance and their glorification of military action. They cannot even discuss peace without making threats." Ambassador Morrison activated the chamber's central display, showing footage from that morning's events at Heathrow Airport. "War Leader Zektar, I think you may be misunderstanding what human military culture actually represents. This morning, one of our airline employees treated Flight Lieutenant Thompson poorly. Within minutes, our king personally intervened to ensure he was treated with proper respect. The footage showed the royal convoy, the honor guard, and most importantly, King Charles personally greeting Marcus. This isn't a society that worships war, War Leader. This is a society that honors those who serve others, even at great personal cost." The Centaurian Prime Delegate made a sound that indicated deep consideration. The Centaurian Republic notes that the human response was not to punish the airline employee, but to honor the warrior. This suggests a culture that understands the difference between justice and vengeance. Marcus realized that the conversation had reached a crucial turning point. The Zephyrians had overplayed their hand, allowing the other species to see the contrast between human values and Zephyrian aggression. But he also sensed that War Leader Zektar was preparing for one final argument that could still sway the undecided delegations. War Leader Zektar raised himself to his full imposing height, his armored carapace gleaming under the chamber's lights. His multiple eyes focused on each of the Victoria Cross recipients in turn, as if memorizing their faces for some future reckoning. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made Zephyrian speech so intimidating. "You speak of human honor and human values, but you have not asked the crucial question: what happens when these honored warriors decide that diplomacy has failed?" The chamber grew quiet as delegates leaned forward to hear his argument. Marcus could sense that this was Zektar's final play, the argument he believed would turn the other species against humanity. These 12 humans destroyed 47 Zephyrian ships during our previous conflict. They killed over 30,000 of our finest warriors. They did this not through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but through what they call tactical innovation, and what we recognize as ruthless creativity in the art of destruction. Zektar gestured toward Marcus specifically. Flight Lieutenant Thompson held off 3 of our assault craft single-handedly. Do you know how he accomplished this impossible feat? He turned his own ship's reactor into a controlled nuclear explosion, timing the detonation to destroy our vessels while somehow surviving the blast himself. Several of the smaller delegations shifted uncomfortably. The Zephyrian was painting human military innovation as evidence of dangerous unpredictability. Commander Harris held an orbital platform for 18 hours against our entire 4th Fleet. Her tactics included using civilian evacuation pods as improvised missiles, creating debris fields to hide her real position, and eventually ramming her station's command module into our flagship while she was still aboard. The war leader paused for effect, letting his words sink in. Squadron leader Chen survived ramming her fighter into one of our capital ships by using her ejection seat's emergency beacon to overload our targeting systems, blinding our defenses long enough for human reinforcements to arrive. Marcus realized what Zektar was doing. He was taking their greatest moments of heroism and framing them as evidence of human unpredictability and dangerous innovation. It was actually a clever strategy. Make the other species afraid of humanity's tactical creativity. These are not normal military minds, honored delegates. These are humans who think in ways that violate conventional strategic doctrine. They turn retreat into attack, defense into offense, and defeat into victory through methods no other species would consider. The Andromedan science captain's harmonic frequencies indicated deep analysis. War leader Zektar raises an interesting point about human tactical adaptability. However, the Andromedan collective notes that all the examples cited were defensive actions taken to protect civilian populations. But Zektar pressed his advantage. Today you see them in diplomatic dress speaking of peace and honor. But what happens tomorrow when they decide that peace is no longer possible? What happens when these creative, adaptable, honored warriors conclude that force is necessary? Captain Murphy, whose Victoria Cross came from evacuating civilians under impossible circumstances, stepped forward. War leader, with respect, you're describing the actions of people who refuse to give up when protecting others. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should ask yourself why. Because, Zektar said triumphantly, it means that humanity is utterly unpredictable in conflict. You cannot negotiate with a species that might suddenly decide to turn their medical stations into weapons platforms, or their evacuation ships into assault craft, or their defensive positions into offensive launch points. Marcus saw several delegations nodding thoughtfully. The Zephyrian was making a sophisticated argument that human tactical flexibility made them unsuitable partners because they couldn't be counted on to follow conventional rules of engagement. Then Flight Sergeant MacLeod, the gruff Scottish engineer, spoke up in his distinctive accent. Aye, war leader, you make a fair point. We are unpredictable, but you've missed the most important part of the pattern. The chamber focused on MacLeod, who had remained quiet throughout most of the proceedings. Every single action you've described was taken to save lives. Not to take them, but to save them. We're unpredictable in one very specific way. We'll do anything, sacrifice anything, risk anything to protect innocent people. The Centaurian Prime Delegate's forearms moved in gestures of agreement. The Centaurian Republic recognizes this pattern. Human tactical innovation appears to be directly proportional to the threat faced by their civilians. Squadron Leader Chen added, War Leader Zektar, you're absolutely right that we don't fight by conventional rules. But you failed to mention that we only fight when someone else breaks the rules first. Every action you've described was a response to Zephyrian aggression against civilian targets. Ambassador Morrison activated the chamber's display again, this time showing strategic maps from the Zephyrian War. The pattern is quite clear, honored delegates. Human forces used conventional tactics until Zephyrian forces began targeting civilian populations. Only then did our military begin employing what the war leader calls tactical innovation. Marcus realized this was his moment to speak. The chamber had heard about human unpredictability and human tactical creativity, but they needed to understand what drove it. War leader Zektar, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "You're afraid of us, not because we're aggressive, but because we're protective. You know that if you threaten innocent people anywhere in the galaxy, humans will find a way to stop you, regardless of odds or conventional tactics." The silence in the chamber was profound. Marcus continued. "This morning, a civilian employee disrespected a war veteran. Within 8 minutes, the King of England personally intervened. That's the same pattern you've been describing in military terms. When someone who served others is threatened or disrespected, the entire weight of human society responds." The Andromedan science captain's harmonics indicated sudden understanding. The Andromedan collective recognizes the correlation. Human tactical unpredictability and social protective instincts appear to be manifestations of the same cultural imperative. Zektar's multiple eyes, fixed on Marcus with something approaching respect mixed with fear. "You're proving my point, human. Your species cannot be trusted to respond proportionally to threats." "No," Marcus replied calmly. "We can't. If you threaten our civilians, our allies, or our values, we won't respond proportionally. We'll respond completely. We'll find ways to stop you that you never imagined possible. And we'll do it not because we love war, but because we love peace enough to fight for it in ways that make war too costly to continue." The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates realized what they had just witnessed. The Zephyrians had tried to use human tactical creativity as evidence of dangerous unpredictability, but had instead revealed the protective instincts that drove it. The Centaurian Prime delegate stood, her forearms moving in formal diplomatic gestures. "The Centaurian Republic wishes to propose expanded military cooperation with human forces, specifically including the tactical expertise of their Victoria Cross recipients." One by one, the other delegations began voicing their positions. The Andromedans requested detailed tactical seminars. The smaller worlds asked for human protection agreements. The neutral species aligned themselves firmly with the human position. War leader Zektar looked around the chamber, realizing that his strategy had completely backfired. By trying to make the other species fear human unpredictability, he had instead made them appreciate human protection. As the session concluded with overwhelming support for increased human participation in galactic defense, Marcus reflected on the strange chain of events that had brought them here. Jennifer's dismissive attitude at Heathrow had triggered a royal intervention, which had led to a diplomatic triumph that would reshape galactic politics for years to come. Sometimes, Marcus thought, the smallest acts of disrespect could have the most unexpected consequences. And sometimes the best way to demonstrate human values was to let others see exactly how far humans would go to protect what they believed in.